Welcome back to Way Too Early. It's a minute or so before 5:30 a.m. on the East Coast, 2:30 out west. I'm Jonathan Lemire. Thanks for being with us. U.S. officials are saying that it appears that Ukraine's long-awaited counteroffensive is underway. As the New York Times reports, the stepped-up activity includes increased artillery strikes and ground assaults. The fighting so far is focused east of where most experts predicted it would begin. Experts do say, though, that Ukraine's forces can still push south from that location in order to try to cut off the land bridge connecting occupied Crimea to mainland Russia. U.S. officials tell the Times their assessment is also based off of satellite imagery, which indicates increased movement within Ukrainian military positions. Russian reports do corroborate what appears to be the beginning of that strike, with Moscow saying Ukrainian mechanized forces launched their broadest assault in months on Russian positions. A spokesman for Russia's defense ministry said Ukraine had begun to push through 5 areas of the Russian line in Ukraine's Donetsk region. At the same time, a spokesperson for the Ukrainian army is denying that the counteroffensive has actually begun, calling Russia's claim, quote, delusional. The two sides also differ on the outcome of the fighting in recent days. Meanwhile, Ukraine is accusing Russia of wrecking a major dam and hydroelectric power station near Kherson today, while Russian state media accused Ukraine of the attack. Hundreds of residents living downriver have had to evacuate due to floodwaters. The country's nuclear operator is warning the destruction of the dam could have negative consequences for the nearby Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, but calls the situation controllable at the moment. Some thought here that if Russia was behind this attack, they think it would try to, the flood would slow down a Ukrainian surge. Joining us now here on set, senior fellow at the Eurasia Group Foundation, Mark Hanna. Mark, thanks for being here.
Good morning, John.
Glad to get your expertise. So let's start with these reports that it appears that the Ukrainian counteroffensive either has begun or is about to. Certainly, the fighting has stepped up. What is your sense of what Ukraine needs to accomplish here in these next weeks or months of fighting?
Right, and that's the big question, right? I mean, so far Ukraine has said plans love silence, right? And we're not going to give them any silence, and it's American military satellite imagery is picked up through infrared, as well as reporting on the ground that there is stepped-up fighting. The question here is, what can Ukraine do, right? We're looking at 300 miles of front with Russians who have spent months digging in. So last fall, when Ukraine took Kherson, when it took Kharkiv, Russian defenses, they poked holes pretty easily in Russian defenses. It's unlikely that they're going to have that sort of cakewalk this time around, given Russia's sort of preparation for this. It's going to be a bloody couple months. Let's just be really clear about that. The war right now has claimed about 50, 60,000 Russian lives, 20,000 by American military estimates, Ukrainian lives. This is trench warfare, like in the World War I style, where they're fighting over, large fronts with tanks and mixed with drones that Russia has to basically identify Ukrainian military positions. So we're looking at kind of combined arms operations that are, really bloody, and it's going to be really difficult to see at what cost Ukraine can retake some of this occupied land.
Yeah, you make a good point. Last year's Ukraine counteroffensive was so successful, in part it was so stunning and fast. Mm-hmm. This year, Russia has seemed to have learned from some of their mistakes. The fighting will be a lot tougher. U.S. officials have said their expectations are far more modest this time around. So as the two sides are fighting here, there has been some talk that it's the end of this fighting season, which again could be months, that might lead to the first thought of negotiated settlement, that Ukraine might be in a position where they're willing to talk. Russia might be willing to come to the table. What's your sense of that?
I think that's what the American officials are hoping for, and that's been their sort of line since the beginning of this war, right? Like, we're not going to set an end state. We're not going to create battlefield objectives for Ukraine. Ukraine has agency, and they're the ones that get to pick that. That made a lot of sense in the beginning of this war. Now, I think that, it's unclear, Ukraine will continue to press its advances as long as it has Western support. So I don't see a sort of battlefield or a military victory in the short term. Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has said that to us at the Eurasia Group Foundation in our podcast, None of the Above, that it is unlikely. And there's a study by the Center for Strategic and International Studies that shows when wars go on more than 1 year, they tend to last about a decade on average. So we could be looking at another forever war here. It might be time for the Biden administration, if they haven't already done this in a quiet way, to kind of persuade their Ukrainian counterparts that this might be the time, try to get a couple quick wins on the battlefield, and then press their advantage by trying to take Russia to the negotiating table.
And then lastly, we want to turn to China now. And I know you've done a lot of studying of what's happening there. There's been a couple of seemingly provocations from the Chinese military, both a fighter jet and now a Chinese warship in the Taiwan Strait. Tensions just soaring between the two countries right now, not much in the way of diplomatic communication. Where do you fear this is going?
Yeah, I mean, right now, this kind of buzzing activities where we've seen a Chinese naval ship sort of cut off at 150 meters, an American destroyer in the Taiwan Strait. These are not just symbolic displays or shows of force, but they are that to some extent, right? And so we have to be mindful that these kinds of behaviors, the harassing behavior back and forth, has happened for a long time. This was a plot line in the West Wing during the Clinton administration, right? So this is nothing new. But given the stepped up tensions that are undeniable between the United States and China, and the kind of lack of goodwill that's come from this rhetorical escalation or this rhetorical overheating, it's much more prone to kind of accidental conflict. And so the America's ambassador to China has spoken with Chinese foreign minister, and China's foreign minister has said we need to make sure that we're sort of de-escalating, we're spiraling downward, not upward, and not getting ourselves into this kind of accidental risk. So there needs to be more diplomatic communication. We just saw at the Shangri-La summit, Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary for the United States, shaking hands with his counterpart. We need more sort of bilateral and sort of track 1 and track 2 diplomacy happening between the United States and China to avoid such sort of dangerous and consequential miscalculation.
Right. Who knows what the accident could lead. A terrific analysis this morning. Senior fellow at the Eurasia Group Foundation, Mark Hanna. Thank you. Great to see you as always. Coming up here, we're going to turn to business news.